Billionaire left his black ex for a stunning supermodel. But his ex came to his luxury wedding in Las Vegas in a Rolls-Royce with quadruplets, wearing a Rolex that's worth more than the budget of the wedding. She stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, her emerald gown catching the desert sunlight, and for a moment, time stood still. The billionaire, standing at the altar with his model bride, felt his heart stop as he saw the quadruplets, his children, walk beside her, their presence a reminder of everything he had lost. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Let's proceed. The Las Vegas Strip gleamed like a beacon in the night, a glowing mosaic of lights and colors, as if the entire city was holding its breath in anticipation. The wedding venue sat at the edge of the Strip, an exclusive, private resort catering only to the wealthiest. The air was thick with the scent of orchids and fresh-cut roses, their petals scattered along the ivory carpet that led down the grand aisle. Crystal chandeliers hung above, casting a soft, almost dreamlike glow over everything. Palm trees swayed lightly, their silhouettes dancing against a backdrop of neon signs and desert stars. In a room just off the main hall, the billionaire groom, Gavin Blackwell, stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the cufflinks on his crisp, white dress shirt. His reflection showed a man who had it all: immense wealth, power, and status. He had built his empire from the ground up, transformed every obstacle into an opportunity. Now, as he prepared to marry Isabella Marlowe, a stunning supermodel, he could almost taste a final piece of the life he dreamed of. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, tailored to emphasize the sharp angles of his physique. His eyes, sharp and cold, were fixed on his reflection, but his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't his new wife that occupied his thoughts, nor the upcoming celebration that awaited him and his guests. No, it was a faint echo of someone else, the only person who had ever managed to slip through the cracks of his carefully curated life. Kayla. Her name flitted through his mind, unwelcome but persistent. The woman he had loved, the one he had abandoned, and more importantly, the mother of his children. His children. A fleeting shadow of regret clouded his face before he forced it away. Standing straighter, pulling his focus back to the mirror. Today is about Isabella. Today, everything is right. He turned, checking the time on his platinum watch. The guests were beginning to arrive. It was time to get ready. Across town, in a sleek penthouse overlooking the city's pulse, Kayla Thompson stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her gaze lost in the endless horizon. The sun had long since dipped beneath the desert, leaving only a faint afterglow. Her quadruplets, now 6 years old, were getting dressed in their bedroom, excited chatter filling the air as they tried to put on their clothes themselves. She wore an emerald green silk gown that caught the light in mesmerizing ways, its dramatic train trailing across the floor. The gown was elegant, but it was the way it made her feel that mattered. Powerful, unstoppable, a reflection of everything she had become since she and Gavin had parted ways. Her fingers brushed over the diamond tiara resting on the vanity, and then the matching emerald necklace she had chosen for the evening. She didn't need to wear these things to prove her worth. But tonight, she wasn't just showing up as his ex. She was showing up as a woman who had built her own empire, who had worked tirelessly to raise 4 children on her own. She had done it without him. She had done it for them. Her gaze shifted to quadruplets, standing in front of a full-length mirror. All 4 of them were dressed impeccably. 3 boys in sunshine yellow tuxedos, and 1 girl in a matching princess dress. Their faces, identical in every way, flashed a smile at her through the mirror. Her heart swelled with pride. They were her entire world, her heart and soul, and tonight she would ensure they had a place in the world of their father, no matter what had happened between them. The car was ready. She could hear the engine of the Rolls-Royce Cullinan outside, its sleek black body gleaming under the lights of the street. She turned to the children. "You ready?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with authority. The kids nodded enthusiastically, and as they headed toward the door, her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what to expect from this night. She hadn't seen Gavin in years, but the thought of walking into the most important event of his life with the children he had abandoned still made her stomach tighten with emotion. There was no going back now. They piled into the Rolls-Royce, the doors closing with a soft but heavy finality. The reception area was brimming with excitement as the guests filtered in, their faces a blur of tuxedos and glamorous gowns, the sounds of laughter and chatter filling the air. Gavin stood at the front of the venue, his heart racing with anticipation as he waited for Isabella, his bride-to-be, to make her entrance. His attention was solely on her, imagining the look on her face when she walked down the aisle, the culmination of everything he had worked so hard to build. But then everything stopped. The door swung open, and in the quiet moment that followed, all eyes turned. There was no mistaking her. Kayla. She stepped into the space with the kind of grace that demanded attention. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated the room. It was the undeniable presence she carried with her, the quiet strength that radiated from her every step. The rich emerald of her gown shimmered under the lights, its luxurious silk flowing with her movements. Her diamond tiara sparkled like a crown, and the emerald necklace matched perfectly, drawing the eye to her glowing skin. Gavin's breath caught in his throat. The 4 children flanked her, their identical faces framed by matching yellow tuxedos and the little girl's princess dress. Gavin's heart skipped a beat when he saw them. His children, his quadruplets. He hadn't seen them in so long, hadn't been there for them like he should have been. Kayla's heels clicked on the golden carpet as she walked, her head held high, but Gavin couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in her posture, the way her jaw tightened ever so slightly. She wasn't just here to be an observer. She was making a statement. And the statement was clear. She was taking up space in his world again, whether he liked it or not. Guests turned their heads in awe. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mix of confusion and admiration. Some looked on in disbelief, others in admiration, but all were drawn to her in a way that could not be ignored. The photographer's cameras snapped wildly, capturing each moment, each frame of her entrance, as though she was star of the evening rather than the woman the groom had left behind. Gavin couldn't look away. He watched as the children walked beside her, their matching yellow outfits almost blinding in their brightness, their little hands holding onto her dress for dear life, their eyes wide with wonder. But it wasn't the children who made his heart ache the most. It was the way Kayla stood tall, not out of defiance, but out of strength, her face an unreadable mask, hiding the storm that must have been brewing within her. The way she moved toward him, the same woman he had once loved so deeply, yet now seemed so far away. As Kayla walked toward the front, a flood of emotion surged through Gavin. His chest tightened as he saw her face, the woman who had given him everything, only for him to walk away from her and their children when things got hard. His mind raced, thoughts colliding with each other like a hurricane. What is she doing here? She looked stunning. What am I supposed to say? He knew he had messed up. He had chosen wealth and status over family and love, and now, standing at the front of the church in his tuxedo, ready to marry Isabella, he was confronted with the painful truth. He had built a life without his children, without Kayla, and now it was too late. Kayla's eyes briefly met his, and in that one glance, everything came rushing back. The first kiss, the laughter in the kitchen as they cooked together, the promise he had made to her and their unborn children. She was no longer the woman he had known, but there was still something there, something unfinished, unresolved. The weight of it almost made him crumble, but he didn't. Instead, he straightened up, forcing a calm facade as Isabella, his bride, took his arm. "Ready?" Isabella asked, her voice soft but eager, her excitement clear. Gavin nodded, pulling himself back to the present, but his eyes never left Kayla. She had taken her place among the guests, her children standing next to her, eyes fixed on the ceremony. A soft, unspoken tension filled the air, and Gavin could almost feel the entire room waiting for what would happen next. Kayla stood among the guests, her arms crossed lightly in front of her, her gaze not on the altar or the couple, but on the man who had once been everything to her. His back was turned to her now, but she could still feel the heat of his presence like a storm she could never outrun. She could feel his gaze on her, even as he tried to focus on the ceremony, but she refused to look away. For so long, she had told herself that she didn't need him. She had raised her children alone, worked hard to build her own empire, and become the woman she was today. Yet, seeing him again, standing there in front of her, in the tuxedo she had always imagined him in, made her heart twist painfully. She had tried to let go. She had tried to forgive him for leaving them. But seeing him with Isabella, about to marry someone else, stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about the past. It was about the reality that he had walked away from them all. And now he was here, living a life without them. "You chose this," she thought bitterly, her fingers clenching into fists. "Now you'll see what that choice really cost you." She could feel the eyes of the guests on her. They all wondered why she had come, what her purpose was here tonight. But they had no idea. They had no idea how much it took to walk through those doors, to face the man who had torn apart her world, only to watch him marry someone else. They had no idea that this was her statement, her declaration that she wasn't going to let him erase her from his life so easily. Have you ever had to face someone who made a choice you didn't understand? And what did you do when you saw the consequences of that choice? Gavin stood at the altar, his attention a million miles away. Isabella's hand rested lightly in his, but he barely felt it. His thoughts were consumed by the haunting image of Kayla, the way she had walked into the room, her regal presence lighting up the entire space. He couldn't stop looking at her, despite himself, the woman who had been everything to him, standing there with his children, her eyes cold and unapproachable. His mind was whirling, but outwardly he remained calm, keeping his composure, pretending as though nothing had changed. He couldn't afford to let this mess with his day, not with the millions of dollars invested in this wedding, the guests, the media, and most importantly, Isabella, who was already by his side, waiting for him to say something meaningful. Isabella leaned in, her voice a whisper. "Are you okay?" Gavin turned to her, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course. I'm fine." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine for years. In his mind, he was screaming. The years of ambition and the relentless pursuit of success had come at the cost of everything he had once cherished. And now, standing on the precipice of what should have been a perfect future with Isabella, he was reminded painfully of what he had sacrificed. The moment his gaze wandered back to Kayla, the knot in his stomach tightened. She doesn't belong here, he thought. This is my day. I'm moving forward. I'm finally moving forward. But as the ceremony continued, Gavin could feel the tension gnawing at him. The urge to look at Kayla again was unbearable, but he forced himself to look away. Don't think about the past. Don't think about her. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter from the front row. His eyes flicked back to the children, his children, sitting with Kayla, their faces lighting up as they played with the small, ornate trinkets on the table in front of them. It was a picture-perfect moment, a glimpse of the family he should have had, and the one he could never fully reclaim. Kayla sat in the front row, her children beside her, trying to hold herself together. She felt every single eye in the room on her, the weight of their whispers pressing in on her chest. She had expected this, expected the stares, the judgment, and even the pity. It was all a part of performance she had come here to give. But none of it mattered. What truly mattered was a quiet ache in her heart that she refused to acknowledge. As the ceremony continued, Kayla's gaze flicked to Gavin once more, though she had resolved to keep her distance emotionally. She couldn't let him see how much it hurt to see him standing there, so poised, so perfect, with Isabella at his side. She couldn't let him know how much it still affected her, how every part of her wanted to scream at him. Why couldn't you be here? Why couldn't you choose us? But instead, she sat there, the picture composure. Her children, so carefree and innocent, were a reminder of everything she had fought for and everything Gavin had walked away from. They didn't need him. They had everything they needed in her. And yet, every time she saw them interact with him, even if it was just from a distance, her heart would break into pieces all over again. She crossed her arms, trying to ground herself. This isn't about you, she reminded herself. This is about your children. You have to do what's best for them. Despite her resolve, she couldn't escape the gnawing sensation that her heart was slowly breaking all over again, piece by piece. The ache was unbearable, but she wouldn't allow herself to fall apart. Not now, not in front of everyone. Isabella, standing beside Gavin, watched him closely as his focus seemed to waver. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he was almost physically holding himself back. Something was wrong. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was hiding something, and today he was clearly not himself. She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around his arm. This is supposed to be our moment. Why is he looking at her like that? The moment Kayla had entered, Isabella's breath had caught in her throat. The woman was undeniably stunning, and the children were perfect. Isabella couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, a discomfort she had tried to ignore but couldn't. After all, what did this woman have that she didn't? For a brief moment, Isabella allowed herself to feel bitter. What if Gavin still cares about her? What if this is all a mistake? But then she caught herself. No, I'm here for him. He's with me now. This is what matters. She forced herself to smile, giving Gavin's arm a small squeeze. But even as the smile reached her lips, it felt brittle. She had to keep up the appearance of perfection, of everything being fine, even if deep down the cracks were already starting to show. As the ceremony continued, Gavin tried to focus, but the feeling of being watched by Kayla, watched by the children, watched by everyone, was suffocating. The vows felt hollow, distant, as if they were a script he had rehearsed for years but no longer believed in. The weight of his past choices, the abandonment of his family, pressed down on him with the crushing force of a storm. Kayla's presence had thrown him off balance, and he could feel the resistance in his own chest. He wanted to look at her, wanted to speak to her, but he couldn't. Not here, not now, not with everyone watching. The children were still a presence in his peripheral vision, and every time he glanced at them, it felt like his heart was being torn in two. He had chosen to leave them behind, to move forward without them. But now, it felt like that choice was coming back to haunt him in ways he hadn't expected. They were his children, his flesh and blood. And yet, he had let them go. The ceremony was almost over, but for Gavin, it felt like a lifetime. The reception hall was alive with clinking glasses, gentle conversations, and a hum of excitement that always followed the vows. Gavin had done his best to return to his role as a groom, but every time his eyes strayed toward Kayla, his heart gave a painful lurch. She was seated with the children, their laughter filling the air as they played with a small, decorative ball, something that reminded him of the birthday parties he had missed. It wasn't just their joy that affected him. It was the sight of Kayla, poised, strong, but still so heartbreakingly familiar. The woman who once stood beside him, who shared in everything he had built. His mind kept drifting back to the past, to the way things had once been. He thought of all the times they had dreamed together, their plans for the future, their love. But then he remembered why he had walked away. The pressures of his ambition, the desire for something bigger, something more. Everything had pulled him away from her and their family. And now, standing in the midst of his new life, he realized he had sacrificed something he could never replace. As if on cue, his eyes landed on Kayla again. This time, though, she wasn't sitting in her chair, looking distant. She was walking toward the restroom, her head held high as if nothing had changed. And yet, there was something in the way she walked that made Gavin's heart tighten, an air of determination, but also of restraint. Without thinking, Gavin stood from his seat, excusing himself to Isabella. He had to speak with her. He knew he had to. There were things left unsaid, things that had been buried for far too long. Kayla had just entered the restroom when she heard footsteps behind her. She stiffened, recognizing the presence before the voice followed. Kayla. She didn't turn around at first. She knew exactly who it was. The sound of his voice after all these years still had the power to break down the walls she had worked so hard to build. "What do you want, Gavin?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her words cut deep. Gavin stepped closer, the soft echo of his shoes on the tile floor, the only sound between them. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. So much time had passed, and yet it felt like no time at all. "I didn't expect you to come here today," he said quietly, his voice almost apologetic. Kayla let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't. But I'm here, Gavin, and you don't get to control that." There was a pause. She could feel the familiar tension between them, the words they'd never said hanging in the air, unsaid. It was as if the years of separation hadn't existed, as though they had never been apart. They stood there, just inches from each other, neither of them moving. Her back was still turned, but she could feel his presence behind her, unwavering. "Kayla, Gavin started, but the words caught in his throat. She spun around, finally meeting his gaze. "What, Gavin? What is it you want to say? After all these years, after everything you've done, now you want to talk?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. The sharpness, the pain, the rawness in her voice. It was all so real, so powerful. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "But I need you to understand. I never stopped thinking about you, about the kids." Kayla took a sharp breath, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. She wasn't going to cry. Not here, not in front of him. "You left us, Gavin. You walked away from me, from us." Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with the weight of those words. "You made your choice. You don't get to come back now and pretend that none of it matters." Gavin flinched, as if she had slapped him. His chest felt heavy, as though the weight of all those years without her was pressing down on him. He stepped closer, his gaze locked with hers. "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice low. "I should have fought for you, for our family. I let my fear, my ego, drive me to make the worst decision of my life." Kayla shook her head, backing away from him slightly. "And now you want to come back because your perfect life isn't as perfect as you thought? You think I'll just forgive you and everything will be fine?" Gavin swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to apologize, to say the words that would make everything right, but he knew he couldn't. It wasn't that simple. "No, I don't expect forgiveness. I never will." His voice was a whisper now, the weight of his regret sinking deeper. "But I need to try. I need to be there for them. For you. I need to at least try to make it right." Kayla didn't answer immediately. She turned her head, her gaze drifting to the mirror. The woman staring back at her was someone she didn't recognize, strong, independent, self-sufficient, but still carrying the scars of love lost, of a future shattered. "Gavin," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "It's too late. You've made your choice. I've made mine." Just as the words hung in the air, the restroom door creaked open, and the quadruplets entered, laughing as they ran toward their mother. The moment they appeared, the heaviness in the air seemed to dissipate, if only for a second. Kayla's heart lightened as the children rushed toward her, their innocent faces a pure reflection of her love and sacrifice. "Mama," one of the boys called out, his face lit up in a smile. Kayla's eyes softened, her resolve strengthening as she knelt to embrace them. She couldn't let herself be consumed by the past, by what might have been. She had their future to think about, and she would do it without Gavin. Gavin watched as the children surrounded her, their laughter filling the space. For a moment, he stood frozen, taking the sight of them all, his children. His heart swelled with longing, but also with regret. He wasn't the father he should have been. He had missed so much, and now he didn't know how to get back to them. "Kayla, please," he whispered, his voice raw. She stood up slowly, brushing a hand across her face. "It's over, Gavin. It's done." Her words weren't harsh, but they were final, and with that, she turned toward the door, taking the children's hands in hers as they walked out, leaving him standing alone. After the brief but intense confrontation in the restroom, Gavin stood alone for a moment, the echo of Kayla's words still ringing in his ears. It's over. The finality of it hit him like a tidal wave. He had hoped, foolishly, that time had softened the bitterness between them, that maybe they could rebuild something. But Kayla's resolve had shattered that hope. The wedding continued around him, the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversations a distant hum in his mind. He felt as though he were in a fog, his thoughts consumed by the image of her, the woman he had once loved and lost. The image of his children, now growing up without him, stirred something deep inside him. Gavin stepped away from the crowd, seeking refuge in the quiet of a nearby garden. The heat of the Nevada desert sun had softened to a warm, dusky glow, and the air was cooler now, offering some reprieve. His fingers tightened around the edge of a stone fountain as he leaned against it, staring at his reflection in the water. He barely recognized a man staring back at him, a man who had abandoned his family, chasing success, only to find that success had come at a far higher price than he could have ever anticipated. He closed his eyes, and in that moment his mind flooded with memories, painful, bittersweet memories. It had been a simpler time, back when Gavin was building his empire from the ground up. He remembered the way Kayla had looked at him with trust and excitement, her eyes filled with hope. They were young and full of dreams. They had fallen in love quickly, consumed by the intensity of their passion. They hadn't planned on having children so soon, but when they found out they were expecting quadruplets, everything changed. Gavin had been terrified, but Kayla had embraced it. She had always been the strong one, the steady presence. "I'm scared, Kayla," Gavin had admitted one evening as they sat together, her head resting on his shoulder. "For kids, how do we even begin to handle this?" Kayla had smiled softly, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "We'll do it together. You and me, Gavin. We'll figure it out." But the pressure of the growing family, combined with the overwhelming demands of his burgeoning business, began to take its toll. Gavin's nights were spent in boardrooms, his days on planes, traveling from one deal to the next. The money came in waves, as did the accolades. But each time he came home, exhausted and emotionally distant, Kayla seemed to grow more distant as well. One night, after a particularly grueling week of meetings, Gavin had returned home late. He had hoped for a quiet moment with Kayla, to reconnect. But instead, he found her sitting on the couch, holding one of the kids in her arms as she stared at the wall. She looked up when he entered, her eyes hollow. "Gavin, you're never here," she said quietly, the words cutting deeper than any argument could. "I can't do this alone." His heart had clenched, but guilt and defensiveness flooded him. He couldn't understand why she was upset. Didn't she know how hard he was working? Didn't she see that all of this, the wealth, the success, was for their future? For their children? But Kayla was tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of doing everything by herself. "I need you, Gavin. I need you to be present. I need you to be here for us." But instead of stepping up, he had pulled away, focusing more on his next big deal than on the woman who had stood by him through everything. He promised her it would get better, that he would be there more, but it was too late. The cracks in their relationship had already deepened beyond repair. It wasn't long after that night that everything started to unravel. Kayla had started making decisions without him, decisions about the children, about their future. He had always assumed she would understand. He assumed she would be strong enough to hold everything together, and for a while, she was. But the weight of it all, raising 4 children while watching her husband drift farther away, became unbearable. Gavin had come home one evening to find Kayla packing her things. She wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. She was simply taking what little they had left and preparing to leave. "I can't do this anymore, Gavin," she had said, her voice calm but filled with finality. "I've waited. I've given everything I have, but I can't keep living like this. I need more than this." Her words had struck him like a slap, but it was too late. He couldn't make her stay. He had pushed her away for too long, and now she was walking out the door, taking the children with her. Gavin's hand trembled slightly as he wiped his face, pulling himself back into the present. He hadn't thought about that night in years, but now, standing in the garden, he could still hear Kayla's voice echoing in his mind. The reality of his past mistakes felt suffocating, a crushing weight that refused to let him breathe. He had tried to justify it, to tell himself that he was doing all for them, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had chosen his career over his family. And now, standing at this wedding with Kayla and the children sitting just a few yards away, he realized the full cost of his choices. There were moments in life that defined you, and this was one of them. The moment he chose to turn away from his family, to sacrifice everything he had for the empty pursuit of wealth and status. And now, after everything, he was forced to face the consequences. The children he had abandoned, the woman he had let slip through his fingers. There was no undoing it. Gavin took a deep breath and pushed away from the stone fountain. His legs felt unsteady, his head spinning with the weight of everything he had learned today. The confrontation with Kayla had unsettled him more than he had expected, but it had also clarified something inside him. He couldn't keep pretending. He couldn't keep running from his past. He knew he had to make a choice. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It wasn't about the media or the guests or even Isabella. It was about the family he had lost, the family he needed to find a way back to. The reception continued, but for Gavin, everything felt muted. The laughter, the conversations, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a distant hum. He had stepped outside to the garden after his confrontation with Kayla, but now, as the evening wore on, he found himself pacing restlessly by the fountains, feeling the weight of his regrets pressing down on him. Kayla and the children had been sitting at their table in the corner, their presence impossible to ignore. Every time he glanced over, his heart twisted. He had missed so much. The twins were already getting so big, their bright smiles lighting up the room, while his little girl, played with the other kids, clearly the center of attention. It was a moment he should have been a part of. The reality of his absence from their lives stung him deeply. Kayla was not just a ghost of his past. She was a key to his future. If he could find a way back to her. He watched her for a moment, taking the way she moved, how effortlessly she commanded attention, without even trying. She was radiant, glowing in that emerald gown, but it wasn't her external beauty that consumed him now. It was the way she had shaped their children into strong, independent individuals. How, despite everything he had done, she had made them into the kind of people he had always hoped they would be. It was then that he made a decision. He needed to talk to her, not in anger or resentment, but with the honesty and vulnerability he had been avoiding for so long. Gavin found himself walking toward Kayla, his heart pounding in his chest. Kayla hadn't expected Gavin to approach her again, but when she saw him walking toward her, her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. His presence was like a storm, chaotic, unpredictable, and yet there was something undeniably magnetic about him. She had spent the past few years building herself up, creating a life where she didn't need him. She had fought every day to ensure that her children never felt his absence, that they would never be haunted by the reality of their father's abandonment. But now, here he was, standing in front of her, the man who had once broken her heart, and yet there was something different in his eyes, something raw, something vulnerable. He cleared his throat, taking a step closer. "Kayla," he began softly, his voice catching slightly. "I've spent so much time trying to ignore this, trying to pretend that I could outrun my mistakes. But I can't anymore." Kayla stood still, her arms crossed protectively in front of her. She was used to being strong, used to standing on her own, but with Gavin's words, she felt a crack in the armor she had built over the years. "I've always been good at pretending, Kayla," Gavin continued, his voice low. "Pretending that I had it all figured out, that the business was enough, that the success was enough. But when I look at you, when I look at them," he nodded toward the children, "I see what I've lost, what I gave up for nothing." Kayla's gaze softened, but only for a second. She knew that feeling, that deep, aching guilt that gnawed at you long after you realized what you'd lost. But still, she couldn't bring herself to forgive him. Not yet. "You can't just come back into our lives, Gavin," she said quietly. "You can't just show up and think everything will be fixed because you say the right words." Gavin nodded, his expression pained. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. Hell, I'm not even sure I deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I'm not the same man I was when I left. I've spent the last few years looking at myself in the mirror, and I don't like who I see. And it's not just about me anymore, Kayla. It's about us. It's about the family I turned my back on." For a long moment, Kayla said nothing. Her eyes studied him, searching for any sign that his words were genuine. She had heard apologies before, but they had never felt like this. This wasn't the self-justifying man she had known, the one who always hid behind his ambition. This was a man stripped of his pride, standing before her with nothing but regret. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Gavin," she said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "But I do know that the kids, they deserve more than what we gave them." The vulnerability in her voice, the way she hesitated, as if still holding on to the last pieces of her broken heart, moved Gavin more than he could express. "I know," he whispered, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." There was a silence between them as they stood there, the weight of the years stretching out, heavy in the air. But for the first time in so long, Kayla felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. Not because she was ready to forgive him. She wasn't. But because she finally saw the man he could be. Not the man who had walked away, but the man who was willing to fight for his family. And for a moment, they were no longer just two people who had been torn apart by betrayal. They were two parents standing together, both wanting the same thing, a future where their children could have everything they deserved. Kayla took a deep breath and looked at him, her eyes softer now. "I don't know if we can start over, Gavin, but I'll make sure the kids know that you're trying, that you're here now. That's all I can give you." Gavin reached out, his hand hovering between them before slowly settling on hers, tentative but real. "That's all I need." For the first time in years, the air between them didn't feel so heavy. There was no magic moment of reconciliation, no grand gesture that fixed everything. But there was something important, something real, a connection that had been broken but wasn't beyond repair. As they stood there in the garden, with the distant hum of the wedding continuing around them, something unspoken passed between them. They weren't there yet, not by a long shot, but the first step had been taken. And sometimes that was all you needed. Do you think it's possible to rebuild something once it's broken, or are there things that can never be repaired? What's the first step toward healing? The days following the brief but meaningful exchange between Gavin and Kayla felt like a fragile truce, a tentative peace between two people who had spent years avoiding the inevitable confrontation. It was strange, but Gavin felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that, perhaps, he wasn't too late. Hope that there might still be a chance for them to rebuild what had once been so perfect. But just as quickly as hope began to grow, it was shattered by a single unexpected event. The wedding reception had taken a turn toward its closing moments, the final speeches and toasts being made. The air filled with lightness that seemed to erase the tensions of earlier. Gavin, still reeling from his conversation with Kayla, had been trying to focus on Isabella, but his mind kept wandering back to their children, the warmth in Kayla's eyes, the pain in her voice. He had promised himself that he would make things right, but he wasn't sure how to start. Then everything changed. Gavin's phone buzzed, vibrating on the table where it lay beside his drink. He glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat. It was a message from his personal assistant, Tara, the one person in his life who had always been there when he needed help managing his empire. His stomach twisted as he read the message from Tara. "Gavin, I need to talk to you." Something came up. "It's urgent. Can you step outside for a moment?" He frowned. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait? He excused himself from Isabella, who had been engaged in conversation with other guests, and made his way toward the exit. The cool night air hit him like a shock to the system as he stepped outside onto the private balcony of the resort, the Las Vegas skyline twinkling in the distance. Tara was already there, standing near the railing, her face serious. The moment he approached, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What's going on, Tara?" Gavin asked, a hint of anxiety creeping into his voice. "You sounded like it was urgent." Tara took a breath and hesitated, her eyes scanning the balcony as if to make sure no one else was around. "It's about the merger you've been working on, the one with Kendrick Industries." Gavin's eyes narrowed. He had been pushing hard for the merger, a deal that would put his company at the top of the market. Everything had been lining up perfectly, until now. "What about it?" "Gavin," Tara said quietly, "the deal's not going through. Kendrick just backed out, and—" She paused, looking as if she were struggling with how to say the next words. "There's more. I think you need to see this for yourself." She pulled out her phone and handed it to him. On the screen was a news article with a headline that made Gavin's blood run cold. "Billionaire Gavin Blackwell's company under investigation for financial fraud. Allegations of insider trading surface." Gavin's mind went blank. The room around him seemed to spin as he stared at the words. He could barely comprehend the full scope of the article. It was filled with accusations of illegal trading, corrupt business practices, and fraud. His company, his empire, was under fire. This wasn't just a business setback. This could ruin everything he had worked for. "What the hell is this?" Gavin whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know the details yet," Tara said, her voice urgent. "But I've been trying to warn you. There have been rumors, talking in the circles. People are starting to investigate." His entire world felt like it was crumbling around him. He had built this empire on the foundation of his hard work, his ambition, and his vision. But now it seemed that everything was falling apart, all because of one person's greed, someone he had trusted, someone who had betrayed him. Back inside the reception hall, Kayla sat quietly at the table with the children, their laughter filling the air as they enjoyed a piece of cake. The energy of the party had lightened since her conversation with Gavin, and she had allowed herself to feel a glimmer of peace. She couldn't forgive him yet, but she had accepted that, for the sake of their children, there might be a way forward. There had to be. But then, just as she was starting to relax, she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't the temperature of the room. It was a sudden, gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. She tried to ignore it, but the unease in her stomach grew. The children were still laughing, still caught up in their innocent joy, but Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just shifted. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from a trusted friend, a former colleague from the business world. She had been out of that life for years, but her connection still held strong. The message made her heart race. Kayla, I don't know if you've heard, but it looks like Gavin's company is being investigated. Allegations of financial fraud. It's all over the news. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Gavin's name was plastered across the news again, but this time it wasn't about his success. It was about his downfall. She felt her chest tighten. She knew Gavin's empire was everything to him. She knew he would stop at nothing to build it, even if it meant sacrificing their family. But she hadn't expected it to end this way. Not like this. Her phone slipped from her hand, landing on the table with a soft thud. She tried to steady her breath, trying to keep the children from sensing her distress. But everything inside her felt torn. Gavin had promised to be a better man. He had promised that things would change. But now, standing there, with this new betrayal hanging over them all, Kayla realized that she had been foolish to believe in the possibility of change. Her world was about to shatter all over again. Gavin stood on the balcony, the weight of the world crushing him as Tara's words echoed in his ears. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was suddenly hanging by a thread. The betrayal stung like 1,000 needles. He tried to steady his breathing, but the reality of the situation was suffocating. His empire, his entire life, was in jeopardy. The headlines, the investigations, the accusations. It was all coming for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had one choice now. With grim determination, Gavin stormed back inside, ignoring the guests, the celebrations. He knew what he had to do. He had to confront the truth, confront Kayla, and face the consequences of his actions. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about everything that had been lost, everything that he might never get back. He found her sitting with the children, the peaceful scene now shattered by the reality of the storm brewing outside. "Kayla," he said, his voice hoarse. She looked up, her eyes filled with confusion, but something deep in them told him she already knew. "I need to tell you something," Gavin said, his heart racing. Kayla's face hardened, and she stood up slowly. "What is it, Gavin?" Her voice was calm, but it held an edge. "I'm being investigated," he said, the words heavy. "There are allegations of fraud, insider trading. My company, everything I built, it's all falling apart." Kayla's eyes darkened and she stepped back. "So, it's all just falling apart then, just like it always does." Gavin's chest tightened. "I don't know how this happened. I don't know who's behind it, but I promise you, I didn't do this." Kayla didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. The betrayal, the weight of it all, it was too much to bear. She had given everything to this man, had loved him and believed in him. And yet here they were, standing on the edge of yet another broken promise. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Gavin," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can keep fighting for something that doesn't exist anymore. What would you do with the life you had built? Everything you thought was secure began to unravel. How would you face the consequences of your actions? The wedding reception had lost its luster. The music, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed hollow, a dull thrum in the background of a night that had long ago spiraled out of control. Gavin felt every moment of it, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a boulder he couldn't escape. Every glance at Kayla, every hesitant look from the children, his children, reminded him of how much had been lost. He had promised change, promised that he would fight for them. But now, standing at the center of a crumbling empire, he realized how hollow those promises had been. It wasn't just about the money or the merger that had fallen through. It was about the betrayal, his betrayal, not just of his business partners, but of Kayla and their children. His company was in free fall. He had no answers, no solutions. The accusations against him were too serious, the investigations too thorough. He could try to fight back, use his wealth and connections to cover up the mess, but he knew deep down that this wasn't something he could escape with money or power. He thought of his children, his beautiful, innocent children who deserved more than the man he had become. He thought of Kayla, who had fought so hard to make sure they had a life. Even after he had walked away, she had carried the weight of their family alone, and now, here he was, standing on the edge of losing everything once again. But what did he have left? Could he still salvage something from the wreckage of his choices? He turned his gaze to the exit, to where Kayla stood with the children, her back straight, her eyes distant. She was holding herself together with a grace that both humbled and terrified him. He had hurt her more than she could ever truly express, and yet she was still here. She was still fighting for their children, even if that meant keeping him at arm's length. Gavin took a deep breath, then made his decision. He had no choice but to face the consequences. But more importantly, he had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could no longer run from what he had done. Kayla had barely spoken a word since Gavin had delivered the news about the investigation. She had watched him, her eyes hard, her heart conflicted. She had spent so many years building a life without him, finding her own strength and protecting their children. She didn't need him to complete her, and she certainly didn't need him to define her happiness. And yet, the man who had once been her world stood before her, broken, vulnerable, and deeply regretful. His confession, his pain, it stirred something inside her, something she had buried for so long. But could she ever truly forgive him? Could she trust him again after everything that had happened? The doubts gnawed at her. The anger, the betrayal, it was still there, just beneath the surface. She glanced down at the children, watching as they played nearby, unaware of the storm brewing around them. They were innocent, still too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships. They deserved better than the fractured world Gavin had left them with. They deserved more than what they had been given. What if I let him back in? What if I gave him the chance to prove himself? But deep down, she knew that this wasn't just about Gavin. It was about her, too, about what she needed. Did she still have space in her heart for him? Could she open herself up to the possibility of reconciliation, or had too much damage already been done? Kayla's chest tightened as she watched Gavin approach her, his steps slow and deliberate. He was finally making a choice, and it was the hardest thing she had ever had to face. She had to make one. 2. Gavin stopped just a few feet away from Kayla, his heart racing. His chest was tight with anxiety, but he knew what he had to say. He had to be honest with her. No more lies, no more excuses. "Kayla," he said, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion, "I can't fix what's broken. I know that. I can't take back the years I lost, or the way I abandoned you and the kids. But I can try. I can spend the rest of my life trying to fix what I can, even if it's not perfect." Kayla met his eyes, her gaze hard but searching. She wasn't sure what she expected to hear, but it certainly wasn't this. She had heard apologies before, and they had always felt empty. But this felt different. "You can't undo the past, Gavin," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You can't fix what was lost. I've spent so many years building a life without you, for them, for me, and now everything's falling apart again." "I know," Gavin replied, his voice breaking slightly. "I know. I've spent my life chasing after something I thought would fulfill me, and I ended up losing everything that mattered. You, the kids. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. I don't want to walk away from them. From you." Kayla took a deep breath. There were so many emotions swirling inside her: anger, grief, fear. But there was something else there, too. Something that she had buried so deeply. She hadn't even known it was still there. A flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. But then she looked at her children, and the reality of it all hit her again. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of their past. She couldn't keep letting him break her heart, and then expect her to pick up the pieces. "I can't just let you back in, Gavin," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I can't keep doing this to myself, to the kids." "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Gavin said, stepping closer, his hand trembling as he reached out, hesitating before touching her arm. "But I will wait. I will wait for as long as it takes, Kayla, because you and the kids are all I have left. You're the only family I've ever wanted." For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. Kayla stood there, looking into his eyes, her mind racing. The years of anger, of hurt, of everything they had lost, all of it crashed into her at once. She felt the weight of the decision she was about to make. This wasn't just about Gavin anymore. It was about her. It was about what she needed. And in this moment, she realized something. She had already forgiven him, not in the way he wanted or expected, but in the way that mattered. She had let go of the bitterness, of the need for revenge, for retribution. The past would always be there, but it didn't have to define them. "I don't know what the future holds, Gavin," Kayla said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "But I can't keep living in the past. Not for me. Not for them." Gavin's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" Kayla met his eyes, her decision clear in her gaze. I'm saying that we have to start over. We have to rebuild, but not just for the kids. For us, too. I can't promise that it will be easy. I can't promise that it will work. But I'll give you a chance. A real chance." Gavin's heart surged with emotion. He had hoped for this, prayed for it. But to hear her say it, finally, was everything. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly for the first time in years. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Kayla pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes once more. "Don't waste it. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.